Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive. This time, we're taking a look at something that you shared with us, a document all about educational management. It really focuses on classroom management and teacher effectiveness. And some of you might be thinking, okay, I'm not a teacher. Why should I care about this? But trust me, there's something in here for everyone. It's all about sharing knowledge effectively and making learning stick, no matter where you are, whether you're in a classroom or boardroom, or even just having a conversation with a friend.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. The principles we're going to uncover today, they can really be applied to any situation where,
Yeah.
you're trying to communicate ideas and inspire others.
Okay, so let's dive right in. The document starts by talking about enhancing teaching effectiveness. And one of the first things that jumped out at me was this idea that teachers should think of their students as customers. It sounds a little strange at first, but what do you think they're getting at here?
I think it's fascinating how that analogy kind of flips the script on traditional teaching. It moves away from the idea of the teacher as the all-knowing sage and puts the focus on the learner. Just like a business needs to understand its customers to succeed, a teacher needs to understand their students, their needs, their motivations, their learning styles in order to create, an effective learning experience.
So it's about meeting your audience where they are, understanding their needs and tailoring your approach accordingly. And speaking of tailoring approaches, the source really emphasizes recognizing that different students have different skills and abilities.
Exactly. Effective teaching is not a one-size-fits-all endeavor. Some students might thrive in a very structured environment, while others need more freedom to explore. Some learn best through visuals, while others prefer hands-on activities. The key is to recognize these differences and customize your teaching style to fit the unique needs of each learner.
It's like a chef adjusting a recipe based on dietary restrictions. You're still aiming for a delicious and satisfying meal, but you have to be mindful of the individual ingredients and how they work together.
That's a great analogy. And one ingredient that often gets overlooked in teaching, but is highlighted in our source material, is humor.
Oh. Now, this is where things get really interesting. I've always found that a little bit of humor can go a long way in making a lesson more engaging and memorable. Do you think there's a connection between good teaching and, say, good stand-up comedy?
I think there's definitely a parallel. Think about what makes a good stand-up routine work. It's about timing, delivery, and most importantly, connecting with the audience. A skilled comedian knows how to make people laugh, but they also know how to weave in thought-provoking observations, relatable anecdotes, and maybe even a little bit of wisdom. And just like a comedian uses humor to keep the audience engaged, a teacher can use it to make learning more enjoyable and memorable.
It makes sense when you think about it that way. When you create a positive and engaging learning environment, people are more receptive to new information. And that brings us to another crucial aspect of effective teaching, classroom management.
Absolutely. And this is something that applies beyond the classroom as well. Whether you're leading a team meeting, giving a presentation, or even just having a conversation, creating a well-managed environment can make all the difference.
Yeah. The source material talks about the importance of the physical space, things like how the classroom is organized and the overall tidiness. It seems like such a small detail, but it really does have an impact, doesn't it?
Absolutely. A well-managed environment, whether it's a classroom or a boardroom, it minimizes distractions and promotes a sense of order and focus. Think about how you feel walking into a cluttered and disorganized room versus a clean and well-organized one. It can have a subtle but powerful effect on your mindset and your ability to concentrate.
It's almost like it sets the tone for the entire interaction. And speaking of tone, the document also makes the point that discipline is everyone's responsibility. What do you think they mean by that?
I think it's about creating a culture of mutual respect and accountability. The teacher or the leader certainly plays a key role in setting the tone. But ultimately, everyone involved shares the responsibility for maintaining a positive and productive environment. It's about recognizing that everyone's actions and behaviors have an impact on the group as a whole.
It reminds me of that old saying, it takes a village, and it's not just about behavior.
Right.
The document also emphasizes the importance of things like record keeping, which might sound a bit boring, but is actually crucial for effective teaching.
You're right. Record keeping may not be the most glamorous aspect of teaching, but it's absolutely essential. Keeping accurate records allows teachers to track student progress, identify areas where additional support might be needed, and ensure that everyone is moving forward at a pace that works for them.
It's like keeping good notes in a meeting or on a project. It helps you stay organized, track progress, and remember important details.
Exactly. And now moving on to another fascinating aspect of teaching, motivation. The source outlines several techniques for motivating students, and I think these can be incredibly valuable in any context, whether you're trying to inspire a team, engage an audience, or even just motivate yourself.
I was particularly intrigued by the idea of set induction. It's basically about grabbing your audience's attention right from the get-go, and I love how it connects back to what we were talking about with humor and creating an engaging environment. What are some ways to effectively use set induction, whether you're in a classroom or giving a presentation?
Well, the key is to start with something that sparks curiosity and makes people want to learn more. You can start with a surprising statistic, a thought-provoking question, a relatable anecdote, or even a funny story. The goal is to capture their attention and set the stage for what's to come.
I remember a professor I had in college who always started his lectures with a real-world example or a captivating story. It always made the material more relatable and engaging.
Exactly. Another powerful technique they mention is building on existing skills. It's about making connections between what people already know and what you're trying to teach them. It helps create a sense of familiarity and makes new information feel less daunting.
It's like showing someone how to use a new software program. By starting with the features they already know from a program they're comfortable with, it makes the transition smoother and less overwhelming.
Precisely. And the source material also emphasizes the importance of using diverse stimuli. This means varying your approach, incorporating different media, and basically keeping things dynamic to prevent boredom and maintain engagement.
They mentioned the inquiry discovery method, which I thought was particularly interesting. Can you tell me more about that?
Sure. The inquiry discovery method is all about encouraging people to learn by actively engaging with information and discovering things for themselves, rather than just passively receiving information.
So it's about asking questions, experimenting, and making connections on their own. It's like the difference between reading a travel guide and actually exploring a new city on your own.
That's a perfect analogy. When you discover something for yourself, the learning is much deeper and more meaningful. It also fosters a sense of ownership and encourages critical thinking.
Okay, so we've talked about creating an engaging environment, tailoring our approach, and motivating our students or audience. But what about evaluating their progress? The source dives into teacher evaluation and supervision, which, I'll admit, initially made me wonder, how does this apply to me? But as I read on, I realized it's about more than just grading papers. It's about feedback and continuous improvement.
You're absolutely right. Whether you're a teacher evaluating a student's performance, a manager giving feedback to an employee, or even just reflecting on your own personal growth, the principles of effective evaluation are universal.
And the document highlights two main types of evaluation, summative and formative. Can you break those down for us?
Yeah. Summative evaluation is about measuring outcomes at the end of a learning period. It's like the final exam or the performance review. It tells you what's been achieved, but it doesn't necessarily provide guidance for improvement.
So it's a snapshot of where things stand at a specific point in time.
Exactly. Formative evaluation, on the other hand, is more about ongoing feedback and development. It's like the quizzes and assignments leading up to the final exam, or the regular check-ins you might have with your manager or mentor.
So it's less about judgment and more about identifying areas for growth and making adjustments along the way.
Precisely. And this is where the Atchison and Gall supervision model comes in. It's a structured approach to teacher supervision that emphasizes collaboration and feedback.
I'm curious to learn more about this model. Can you walk us through the key steps and how they could be applied in a setting outside of education?
Sure. The first step in the Atchison and Gall model is building rapport between the teacher and the supervisor. This is about establishing a relationship of trust and mutual respect, which is essential for effective feedback. In a workplace setting, this could mean taking the time to get to know your team members, understanding their strengths and weaknesses, and creating a safe space for open communication.
So it's about setting the stage for a collaborative and supportive relationship. What comes next?
The next step is joint planning. This involves the teacher and supervisor working together to set goals, develop lesson plans, and identify strategies for improvement. In a workplace setting, this might mean collaborating on a project plan, outlining clear objectives, and brainstorming ideas for achieving those objectives.
So it's a shared responsibility, not a top-down directive.
Exactly. The third step is observation, where the supervisor observes the teacher in action, gathering data on their teaching practices and student engagement. In a workplace setting, this could involve observing a team member during a presentation, a client meeting, or a project task.
It's about gathering information to see how things are actually working in practice.
Right. And finally, there's the post-observation conference. This is where the supervisor and teacher meet to discuss the observation, provide feedback, and develop a plan for improvement. In a workplace setting, this might mean having a debriefing meeting after a presentation or project milestone, discussing what went well, what could be improved, and creating an action plan for moving forward.
It sounds like a very thorough and structured approach to feedback and development, and it seems like it could be incredibly valuable in any setting where you're trying to help someone improve their skills and performance.
Absolutely. And there's another layer to this whole feedback process that the source material dives into. The power of language. It's something we often overlook. But the words we choose can have a huge impact on how feedback is received.
I completely agree. That's something I've become much more aware of in my own communication. I'm really interested to hear what the source has to say about this.
Well, they make the point that language that fosters a sense of collaboration and mutual respect is more likely to lead to positive change than language that feels critical or judgmental. It's about framing feedback in a way that encourages growth, rather than creating defensiveness or resistance.
It's like the difference between saying, you did this wrong, and saying, I noticed this, and I'm wondering if there might be a different approach. That could be even more effective.
Exactly. It's about shifting the focus from blame to problem solving. And the source material gives some great examples of language that can build rapport versus language that might create tension.
I'm all ears. Let's dive into those specific examples and see how we can apply them to our own communication. This is already proving to be such a valuable deep dive, and I can't wait to see where we go next. So before the break, we were talking about the power of language in feedback and how the right words can make all the difference. The source gave some really interesting examples, and I'm curious to unpack those a bit more.
Yeah, absolutely. One thing they highlight is the importance of, focusing on specific behaviors or situations. Rather than making these sweeping generalizations, for instance, instead of saying, you're always late, which can feel accusatory and make someone defensive, you could try something like, I've noticed you've been late to a few meetings recently. Is there anything going on that's making it difficult to arrive on time?
Right. That's a great example. That first statement feels like an attack, while the second one really invites a conversation and shows that you're genuinely interested in understanding the situation. It reminds me of something else that the source mentioned, avoiding those absolute statements, like always or never.
Yes, those kinds of absolutes can really shut down communication. They make people feel like they're being boxed in and that their perspective isn't being heard. It's much more effective to use language that acknowledges nuance and allows for different perspectives.
So instead of saying, you never take my suggestions seriously, you might say something like, I've noticed that we haven't been able to implement some of my recent suggestions. I'm curious to hear your thoughts on why that might be.
Exactly. It's about inviting dialogue rather than dictating. And another powerful technique the source mentions is using we language. This creates a sense of partnership and shared responsibility, which can be much more motivating than language. That puts the onus solely on the other person.
So instead of saying, you need to improve your presentation skills, you might say, we can work together to make your presentations even more engaging and effective.
Precisely. It shows that you're invested in their success and that you're willing to support them in their growth. And speaking of support, the source also emphasizes the importance of active listening in the feedback process.
Yeah, it's not just about delivering your message right. It's about truly hearing and understanding the other person's perspective, their challenges, and their goals.
Exactly. It's about creating a space where they feel safe to share their thoughts and feelings without fear of judgment. And when you truly listen, you gain valuable insights that can help you tailor your feedback and support their development more effectively.
It all ties back to that idea we were talking about earlier. Treating your students or your colleagues, your team members, or even your friends and family, like customers. It's about understanding their needs and meeting them where they are.
Absolutely. It's about recognizing that everyone is an individual with their own unique set of strengths, weaknesses, and motivations. And when you approach feedback from that perspective, it becomes less about criticism and more about collaboration and growth.
So we've talked about the importance of creating a positive and engaging learning environment, understanding your audience, tailoring your approach, and giving and receiving feedback effectively. It seems like these principles can be applied to a wide range of situations, both personal and professional.
Absolutely. Whether you're leading a team, mentoring a colleague, or even just trying to communicate more effectively with your loved ones. The insights we've gleaned from this deep dive can be incredibly valuable.
I'm already starting to see how I can apply these concepts to my own life. And there's one final thought from the source material that really resonated with me: the importance of enjoyment in teaching. They emphasize that when teachers are passionate and enthusiastic about what they're doing, it creates a more engaging and effective learning environment.
That's so true. Enthusiasm is contagious. When you're genuinely excited about what you're sharing, it inspires others to be excited too. And I think that applies far beyond the classroom. When we bring a sense of joy and purpose to our work, our relationships, and even our everyday interactions, it makes a world of difference.
It's like that saying, choose a job you love and you'll never work a day in your life. But I think it goes even deeper than that. It's about finding ways to infuse passion and purpose into everything we do. Even the tasks that might seem mundane.
Exactly. It's about shifting our perspective from I have to I get to. And when we approach life with that kind of mindset, it opens up a world of possibilities.
So as we move toward wrapping up this deep dive, I think it's worth asking ourselves, how can we bring more of that spirit of lifelong learning into our own lives? What steps can we take to cultivate that mindset of curiosity and growth?
Perhaps it's picking up a new book on a topic you've always been curious about, or enrolling in a course to learn a new skill.
Maybe it's reaching out to someone with different experiences and perspectives and engaging in a meaningful conversation.
Or perhaps it's simply taking the time to observe the world around you with fresh eyes and ask questions about things you might have taken for granted.
Whatever form it takes, I encourage you to embrace the joy of lifelong learning and see where it leads you. It might surprise you where you end up.
I completely agree. And who knows? Maybe the next time you find yourself in a position to share knowledge with others, whether it's giving a presentation at work, teaching a skill to a friend, or even just explaining something to your child, you'll be able to apply some of the insights we've explored today.
Maybe you'll be a little more mindful of your audience, a little more creative in your approach, a little more patient and encouraging in your feedback.
And maybe, just maybe, you'll find yourself enjoying the process a little bit more, both as a learner and as a teacher.
That's our deep dive for today. A huge thanks to expert speaker for joining me on this journey and sharing your valuable insights.
It's always a pleasure to dive deep into these fascinating topics.
And thank you, dear listener, for taking the time to explore these ideas with us. We hope you found something here to inspire you, challenge you, and maybe even change the way you think about learning and communication. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep diving deep. Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We've been on quite a journey today, exploring the world of education and uncovering some surprisingly relevant insights, really for anyone who wants to communicate more effectively or learn more deeply.
Yeah, it's been fascinating to see how these principles, which might seem specific to the classroom, actually have much broader applications.
Absolutely. We've talked about everything from understanding your audience to tailoring your approach, using humor to make things stick, and even the power of language in giving feedback.
Yeah, and one thing that's been a recurring theme throughout our conversation is this idea that learning isn't a passive activity. It's about actively engaging with information, asking questions, and making connections.
And that brings me to the final thought that I wanted to share with you today. It's something that wasn't explicitly stated in the source material, but it's definitely implied throughout. The importance of lifelong learning.
I love that you brought this up. It's something I feel very strongly about as well. In today's world, where information is constantly evolving and change is the only constant, the ability to continuously learn and adapt is essential.
It's not just about acquiring new knowledge, though, is it? It's about cultivating a mindset of curiosity, a willingness to challenge our own assumptions, and an openness to new perspectives.
You hit the nail on the head. It's about embracing the unknown, seeking out new experiences, and constantly pushing ourselves beyond our comfort zones. And it's about recognizing that learning isn't just something we do in school or at work. No, it's a lifelong journey of discovery that can enrich every aspect of our lives.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with a challenge. How can you bring more of that spirit of lifelong learning into your own life? What steps can you take to cultivate that mindset of curiosity and growth?
Perhaps it's picking up a new book on a topic you've always been curious about, or enrolling in a course to learn a new skill.
Maybe it's reaching out to someone with different experiences and perspectives and engaging in a meaningful conversation.
Or perhaps it's simply taking the time to observe the world around you with fresh eyes and ask questions about things you might have taken for granted.
Whatever form it takes, I encourage you to embrace the joy of lifelong learning and see where it leads you. It might surprise you where you end up.
I completely agree. And who knows? Maybe the next time you find yourself in a position to share knowledge with others, whether it's giving a presentation at work, teaching a skill to a friend, or even just explaining something to your child, you'll be able to apply some of the insights we've explored today.
Maybe you'll be a little more mindful of your audience, a little more creative in your approach, a little more patient and encouraging in your feedback.
And maybe, just maybe, you'll find yourself enjoying the process a little bit more, both as a learner and as a teacher.
Well, that's our deep dive for today. A huge thanks to expert speaker for joining me on this journey and sharing your valuable insights.
It's always a pleasure to dive deep into these fascinating topics.
And thank you, dear listener, for taking the time to explore these ideas with us. We hope you found something here to inspire you, challenge you, and maybe even change the way you think about learning and communication. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep diving deep.